Our devotion today is from Exodus chapter 16. In this chapter, we see God teaching the Israelite people how to live in dependence on Him. Before we look at it, remember today to be in prayer for Ronnie and Becky Liptrap. So, this chapter starts out with a familiar scene of the Israelites grumbling and complaining against Moses and against God. This isn't the first time we've seen this. The Israelites have left Egypt at this point. God has led them through the Red Sea, and in the last chapter, He purified this water and took them to a place where they would have water to drink. But on each occasion, we've seen them grumble against God and really just lose faith and think, why did you bring us out here, Moses, just so we could die at the hands of Pharaoh, just so we could thirst to death? And they make this statement here that, man, it'd be better for us if we were back in Egypt, if we were back in slavery. They're literally here wishing that they could go back to being slaves. Well, at least we had food to eat when we were there. They don't realize what God is in the process of doing for them, where He's taking them. They're wishing to be back in slavery. Kind of ridiculous, and yet I think we can understand that, because even from our viewpoint, we don't know what God has for us, and our walk with Christ isn't always easy. And sure, in the flesh, it would be probably easier just to live life gratifying ourselves and let it run its course, and of course in the end we'd be separated from God. We don't know where He's taking us. He didn't promise us that our walk with Him was always going to be easier, the journey He was going to take us on in this life. And yet, we're learning to live and walk in dependence on Him and not in our own strength. And I think that's what we see here with the the Israelite people. God's teaching them. And I think we see so much patience here with God, because in each instance, when they grumble against Him and when they complain and they say, oh, we're going to die out here, God very patiently intervenes. And, we saw it in the Red Sea when He, of course, saved them miraculously from Pharaoh. And then we saw it when He purified the water. And we see it here again as He provides both bread and meat in the wilderness. And there is some interesting rules that He sets up with this. He gives them these rules about collecting bread, and how He says, you don't need to save any for the next day. And then on the Sabbath day, or the day before the Sabbath day, because I've told you that I don't want you to be working on the Sabbath, I want you to collect for 2 days then. And of course, you see that some of them still struggle with being obedient to what God has said, even these simple rules. Some of them try to save some of the bread for the next day. Maybe they're going to need it. Well, what happens? It gets eaten up by worms. It rots, because they didn't need to depend on their own ingenuity or their own planning. God said, take what I give you for this day. I'm going to take care of your tomorrow. You can live in dependence on me. Some of them struggled on that, and sometimes we struggle with that. And it was the same thing with the Sabbath day. Some of them, even though they had been told to honor the Sabbath, went out on the Sabbath day looking to gather more bread, because they're trying to take care of themselves. They're doing what makes sense to them, and there was nothing there for them. And God, Lord, even says, why? How long are you going to continue to refuse the laws that I've given you? And, it doesn't make, it always doesn't make sense for us what God might be calling us to do. We might try to do things in our own strength, and we might try to do things the way that it makes sense to us. And yet, God calls us to live in obedience. We have no idea where He's taking us. He knows, but we trust Him in His faithfulness, that He has good plan for us, and He is able. We're done living our lives for ourselves, for our pleasures. Will that be easy? Absolutely. But God hasn't called us to an easy life. He's called us to an obedient life. because we can obey because of Him, because of His goodness and His faithfulness. I pray God spoke something to you out of this passage today. If He did, leave us a message on Facebook and on YouTube.